So we're trying to figure out this computer so that it does a full screen. But in the meantime, we kind of changed our plan last night, mostly because we wanted to play trivia. No, not really. But mostly because yesterday was such a long day, and there was so much talking at instead of interaction that we really want this to be hands-on and interactive. And so that's what it's going to be. So we really are just going to show an outline of some of the topics that we'd like to cover and really sort of throw it back at you guys. And one of us will be taking notes. We'll also have this on tape, I guess. But one of us will be taking notes so that we have some actions to follow up on. So as soon as we get this figured out, really we just want to have this up. And then Anthony and Kirsten are going to show some examples as well. We can't possibly go through all the different databases that are out there, but some of the goals that Solin and Marcus and Steve really wanted was to at least show you a couple databases and what it feels like to get data as well as input data. So these guys are really best at doing that, and that'll come towards the end. But there are a series of sort of overarching questions that we wanted to kind of throw out to you guys. So, well, maybe we don't know how to do it. It's fine. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Yeah, so just go to the next slide. So we had just a number of different topics to discuss, and you know the what is a Tephra database. I mean, I think that we've talked about this a lot throughout the conference or the workshop, and we all know that it could be anywhere from a super low tech individual's collection of data about Tephra that they've collected, and it sits on their desktop or in their notebooks or whatever. It's still a database. But I think what we're all more interested in are online databases that provide access to a broader group of people like ourselves. And so we want to start talking more about that. But the reality of the situation is that's not the case. We don't all have our data in relational databases that are accessible like Tephra-based, which was amazing today to hear about the details of that database. So let's just jump right into types of data that are important. And I was hoping I could sit down and take notes on this if one of you guys wants to come up here. And we're going to throw this back out at you guys. You tell us what you think is important to go into a database. And so, yeah.
Okay, so this is being recorded, so we'll have to, if you contribute, is this okay? Is it coming through? Yeah, okay. So I'll give you the microphone as well. So basically the idea of this is to what sort of data is important to be recorded in these databases? So what we'd like to do is you tell us what information. Obviously, we've discussed some of this already today. But is anyone who'd like to start?
Just start yelling things out.
Thickness.
Sorry?
Thickness of the deposit.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything? Do you want to expand on that?
No, that's better.
Internal structure.
Internal structure, so...
Okay, well, I mean, if it's cross-bedded, maybe it's reworked. And if it's got different layers with different grain sizes, that means something to the volcanologist that...
Yeah, so that might do with describing the upper and lower boundary of the layer as well, and,
right.
and that sort of thing.
On a relatively simple basis, right?
I wonder if we... Oh, maybe I need to talk into the microphone. Yes. I wonder if we can actually sort of categorize these types of information, because you know what you just mentioned are sort of data pertaining to the actual Tephra layers, and to maybe there are other pieces of information that relate to the geological context.
Well, that's all lithostratigraphic data.
That, okay, but then there is sort of the information that pertains to the methods, sample collection process, and so on. So, you know, there are sort of different categories of information that may be relevant, that might make it easier for us later.
So we can just discuss the properties of the Tephra layer now, and then we can move on to those. So any other lithostratigraphic information that we should be...
Maybe if someone hollers something out, one of the conveners can just repeat it so it gets recorded.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, in terms of the physical volcanologists, on top of grain size, you want density and componentry. And
we'll usually do a huge analysis on all 3 of those, but then it's complemented by other chemistry studies and metrology studies.
Okay. And again, I think that's something that will be done on some samples and not on others, depending on what you're doing and the type of.
Yeah, I mean, we can, like, for the physical volcanologist will do grain size chemistry, grain size density componentry on as many samples as they can. The ideal is to do them all. And for my PhD, I did that for all the samples I took. I did all 3 analyses. Some people don't, but as long as the sample's still there, it can still be done later and added into the database again.
With, again, I'm referring to the identification of the sample to actually be able to integrate it with data that was formally published. So an important aspect that sample identification plays a role.
Yes.
I just want to note that with density, that's both bulk deposit density and class density.
Are we getting down to that level of detail that we want to talk about? Are we getting down to that level of detail that we want to talk about every single parameter that?
We just want to get an idea of them.
Density is one that's often not done both ways.
Well, the maximum class sizes and the thickness are the 2 primary things that have to be measured, I'd say, by physical volcanologists.
What about the big categories of information, like sample information, sample identification, lithographic, stratigraphic information, collector information? I mean, those kinds of.
Collector and archive, wherever samples are. I mean, I heard there was down there you were talking about Lake Core facility and so on. That's.
Yeah, we can fill in the blanks for the little things, and if they're kind of odd things that aren't well kept, let's type up.
I mean, something other important that occurred to me earlier with some slides is obviously you want to link data and observations to eruptions. And I know that the Global Volcanism Database, or Global Volcanism Program, GBP database, identifies eruptions with unique identifiers so that you can link data. So it's really important. What we realized, we were making a sort of little test project in trying to link rock compositions to eruptions, and it turns out that in the literature, no sample, or very, very few, actually are described as belonging to some specific eruption. So it was a try in vain to do that. And I'm not familiar with the data publication that you do, but maybe somebody can tell me, do you usually say this is from this particular eruption? It's well defined.
As a physical volcanologist, we're collecting data about an eruption, so it's absolutely tied to the eruption.
Is it using those unique numbers that the GBP?
In a database, we might include that information, but not in a paper. That would usually not be listed. And usually also we're describing eruptions that maybe just happened, so they're not in any database.
Yeah. And also, you may not know where. I mean, there's many times you may not have a clue where the eruption is when the data is first produced. So.
I mean, that's
an
issue to kind of think about at some point, because it seemed, from the perspective of actually linking different types of data like gas emissions, melt inclusions in rocks and so on together for one eruption, that you're able to do that whatever information you're putting in a database actually, at least there should be a big try in
that's one of the things I realised
recording that.
I said to you, I can't remember, I said to you or someone that I realised that I should have implicitly, where it has been identified the source, that needs to be in the database. So if it's from Hecla or wherever it's from, it should be in there.
Yeah. And
that's very easy to do now. Even I can go back, because there aren't that many. It would be very, very easy to actually do that. But it could be linked again to Smithsonian's unique identifier. That again would be easy to do.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Right, one that I would find really important, and I guess for here, is age. And one thing that you mentioned in your talk was specifically if a date has been produced and it's indirect, how it specifically relates to the Tephra. Particularly for radiocarbon, normally it could be anywhere above, below, both. And for models' ages, I guess it might be useful as well to have the age that was used for the model to produce that.
Yeah, so Tephra base at the moment actually tells you the relationship between the data and the thing, but that could be, yeah.
I guess I just have a question about the ultimate goal of the Tephra database. If we're adding things in about the physical volcanology of it, of the componentry analysis, how you would translate some of that data into a database. Like, for instance, we have a Tephra and we did componentry analysis on 4 different splits of the sample to look at changes through time. So that's something I would report in results of a paper, but to translate that into trying to put it into a framework into a Tephra database would be extremely difficult. So, but me checking a box saying that I have, pumice, crystals, lithics, and such at about this % would be something that I could do. So I'm wondering, like, is the ultimate goal to put as much information as humanly possible about every single deposit we collect, or is it trying to get people to actually do this and record the sample location and some specific information about it, so that if you do want more information about the Tephra, you know what paper to look at or who to contact? Because
I think
there has to be some boundaries on the input and the realism.
Well, I mean, you clearly can have different levels of service in a database. You could make it that you can just discover everything that has been done with a particular sample, or what data types are available for a particular volcano or region and so on, and you just link all these bits and pieces to it. But you can take the other step and actually link integrating information the way I showed it this morning, that you can start really doing statistical analysis on it, doing visualizations, comparisons, and so on. And that needs to be figured out for which data types it makes sense. Obviously, the geochemistry is something that makes sense to integrate as much as you can, so you can do that statistical analysis, even though there were questions obviously about the ability to do statistical stuff on percentages, on compositional data. But other things may be just pieces of information. And I think also when you start talking about the results of statistical analyses or models that you have created, they might just be linked to specific regions so that you can access it and you find out that somebody has done something for that particular region. So I think it depends on the data type where you can, do a real fully integrated database, or where you just catalog what information is available.
So it seems like the database needs to have some hierarchy and different, like physical volcanology, and then the list of things that could be input for that, and then dating the list of things that could be input.
I think that will,
to a main, like, basic information about the Tephra of what's known. So I don't know how how we have this discussion kind of revolving around that, whether we go from topic to topic of what's important to include in those different subcategories.
I wouldn't even, go here in technical details and design details and so on. I think what for the people who run databases, what is usually the most, or systems or build cyber infrastructure, the most important is to get use cases, get use scenarios that you as a researcher say, I want to be able to do this and this and this.
So the questions.
Right, and that's what we did in many of these EarthCube workshops. We actually gathered use cases. As you can talk to the real professionals about use cases. That's a very complex process. But so it's more scenarios how you would use it. And we got actually at the time for the petrology volcanology workshop, there were a number of use scenarios from volcanology. But it would be nice if this group could actually come up with a few ideas. This is the way I want to access and integrate data. Then we can think about how we can work towards that to make it happen.
But can you have a tool that allows us to go to your site and build what we want? Because in reality, why not to have some kind of PHP admin tool that we're sitting building tables, building our interface that particularly specific for our area, and you obviously pumping all the data into your general database. But in the same time, we have we don't have to talk to you guys. You open account and use it.
No, we don't have that capability yet. I mean, that would be a substantial software development effort. It would be fantastic. I like the idea very much, that you basically give users the ability to do that.
I've been making a database on monocraters for 15 years or so, just a small regional database about that group of volcanoes and everything. It's all completely based on physical volcanology, not petrology or geochemistry, although I do put geochemical and petrological data in there when I gather it. But it is an example, and I just developed it over the years based on what use cases, ideas really, but it's like, what do I need? What do I need to go in here? And it can just develop organically like that. And then, as I was saying before, when we were talking before, you can develop that from your own ideas of what you need and everything. That's pretty similar to what other people need, and you can actually dump the structure of that database to other people, or just show the description of what the database is organized like to other people, and that can be used as a template for how to proceed in somebody else's situation. Because a person develops a database based on what they know they need to get out of it, and you just keep adding on and changing it as you realize you screwed something up or need something different and things like that.
Well, I mean,
have configuration script to build your tables.
Well, I mean,
so why not to dump the script?
For me is, it's an issue of building local databases will allow you to work with a certain subset sort of data that's out there in the world. I think that the approach of actually integrating data gives you a much more powerful and bigger data set. So I'm not necessarily a fan of supporting, the development of 50 different databases that are out there and that sit in individual persons' computers. I would rather, have a database with tools, as you just said earlier, that allow you to pull out whatever you need and then work locally with it. That's just my...
Does EarthChem or the other databases, do you have a formally published schema that you use, or any of these databases? Because it seems like, I do these things with paleontological databases as well, and it seems that every workshop you go to, people start reinventing the wheel. And if you can co-op, so we developed one off of paleontology, but we used a existing biological database called Darwin Core, and we just sort of either map onto that or use their fields exclusively. And this interoperability, you're not trying to say, okay, you don't have to change, Marcus doesn't have to change his fields, but your category of such and such may be such and such, yeah. But you have to have one schema that you can map onto, as opposed to redeveloping 15 different schemas and trying to have 50 people map onto different schemas on top of that. So it would be helpful to know what sort of schemas exist or what you developed already.
So we had a schema published in 2000 for the PetDB database and GeoRock, NavDat, they all used the same schema. And that has been adopted, and always, with slight modifications. The MetPetDB database is built on that, but evolved. The critical zone chemistry database is built on that and evolved, and so on. But we've also realized a lot of shortfalls in the database, and so we've actually had a 3-year project that was NSF funded to build a new observation data model, and that is just finishing. On July 31st was the end of the grant, And there's going to be a presentation about it at AGU, and a publication will come out. And that's actually a very, very powerful data model because it's very flexible and can. It's not an easy data model to query, but it's, it will allow, I think, a lot of the mapping that you did. And it was done as a collaboration between people from the hydrology community, from the geochemistry community, from the soil sciences community. So it has a lot of different perspectives were used to build it, and I think that will make it work. But yeah, these schemas are out there, and also the XML schemas that we use to exchange the data, they are all on our website.
Oh, by the way, I didn't mean to say that I have this database sitting on my computer alone for me to use. It's been public for 15 years, so anybody's been able to get to it for that one. I don't advocate people keeping stuff on their computer, but we gotta respect intellectual property though too, at the same time. So I mean, like some communities have 6-month waiting periods or something for PIs to be able to use, or a year waiting period for PIs to be able to use their data, and then they'll release it publicly. We gotta make considerations like that, because
I mean the most databases, especially the catalogs, where you submit the data, and I can show that if we want to see how you can submit data, have the ability to set the release date. So that is usually not our decision when a data set becomes public. That's the decision of your program manager. NSF has rules, and other funding agencies all through the world have rules. It's usually up to 2 years. Some field data, if you're out on a ship, has to be released earlier. So that's guaranteed, but also the aspect of intellectual property, I think that's where it's so important to come to formal data publications, so that there's a clear attribution, there are clear rules how to cite data, and there's, if there is interest, I can show a few slides about ongoing efforts like Force 11, which is a fairly high-level effort of libraries to come to formal rules of data citation. There are efforts going on in actually generating bibliometrics. I don't know if you heard that Thomson Reuters had released a data citation index last year. So all these things are really evolving with the growing data infrastructure, because it is absolutely necessary to ensure that people get the credit they deserve for the data, not only for the interpretations.
Yeah, just to clarify, when we search a chemical analysis of sample XYZ and we get 5 different results of different analyses, do you link to the publication those come from?
Yes, they all linked. Every individual value is linked in the database to the publication, or to a data set if it wasn't part of it. That's absolutely critical. And we actually, at the EarthChem portal, we create statistics how often your value or the values for a particular sample have been downloaded. So you can see the use of the data.
Oh, yes. I've been using a bit GeoMap app. I think it's really useful. So you can have access to existing data, but you can actually plot your own data on the map and use different symbols. I don't know if you have played with that, but use different symbols, for example, for different chemical compositions, variations. I wonder if you can just have volcanic ash data in that and use symbols, I don't know, for thicknesses. Then you can see on the map how your thickness of soil layer changes on a geographical scale. I mean, there are probably...
Oh, absolutely. I was actually, before I came, I went over to the people who run GeoMap app and said, so what volcanological data sets do you have in there? And they don't have very much in there. basically nothing
Yeah,
except
I think
for
these are
the
volcano
volcano locations. So if there are data sets that you would like to become part of GeoMap app, we would be absolutely happy to put that in. You know, GeoMap app came out of the marine world and has a lot of cruise information, you know, bathymetry and so on in it.
They have seismic data.
But they have a lot of seismic data, and you can do, I mean, what is special in GeoMap app is that you can overlay different data types. So you can do really great integration of diverse data types. You can see the geochemistry on top of, you know, Benioff zone depths and things like that. So there's a lot of capability. We just need to get the data sets. If somebody has a compilation, they are, again, in GeoMap app also clearly shows the source, or would give, you know, credit to whoever contributed that. And if there's interest, I haven't prepared anything to show GeoMap app. I assume that there are quite a number of people who don't know it. How many people don't know it? Okay, that's what we've been doing is running webinars. So if there is interest, we can clearly, you know, set up a webinar some point and show, you know, how to use it. There's actually going to be a GeoMap app lunch workshop at the upcoming AGU. So I can send the invitation to a mailing list from this workshop if you're interested.
Yes, there are tutorials.
Tutorials on YouTube, and there's a YouTube
that
channel.
Are really helpful. So I think we spend 15 minutes and then we know how to use it. So.
Can I ask a question about sustainability? I think I'm loud enough for the small room.
Well, I don't know. It's the problem.
Okay.
It's the recording, I think.
So the question is sustainability. Okay, we're going to give you our data. What's going to happen in the 10 years? How do you know you will be able to maintain this gigantic database? Who's going to fund it?
It is funded by the Science Foundation as a facility, and that's as far as you can get. So we get grants over 5 years for this. So that's the service that we're providing, and basically our long-term fate will depend on how good we're doing and how satisfied the community is with what we're providing. With respect to the data, we have agreements with long-term archives. So any data that gets published at the EarthChem library or in the Marine Geoscience Data System goes to one of these long-term archives. All the geophysical data that we have goes to the National Geophysical Data Center, and currently for the geochemistry, it's Columbia University. But I assume that over the next couple of years, the EarthCube will provide solutions for the data facilities to have a common long-term archive, because that's a problem that all the facilities that we currently have are struggling with, to have the capabilities of really ensuring data access over the next 20 years, because nobody knows what's going to happen with NSF funding and so on. So I think, and we founded a Council of Data Facilities this year in January, and those type of organizations will hopefully help to find those, come to those solutions. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we seem to have moved on from what we were saying before. So this is our sort of list. So we've got now just over an hour left before we about to finish. So are there? It would be interesting actually to know what we talked about is who actually uses databases like Tephra or any other sort of Tephra database or volcanological database. Who actually regularly uses these things? So a few people, but not very many. So why do the people who are not using them not use them? If you see what I mean.
Ignorance.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist for a geographic area.
Yeah.
Tephra base is great, but I work in East Africa.
Sorry. Is that generally the? You want to?
Well, a lot of times we already have our. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. It's just a recording.
Oh, I apologize. A lot of times we already have a database that we've set up that's tailored to our project and our work, and then other people that are building these databases and they're building it to a certain standard that we're not using or a certain format. So it just takes a lot of work in your research career just to take your database and then transform it all to where it'll fit in someone else's database. And to make that time and commitment, you want to make sure that it's going to be worth it for you in the long run. And also, so that can be some of the reasons why people aren't using these databases.
It's just good to get opinions.
Is there a comment on that? Is there a way that you can make a script for one of these databases so that when you go to upload it, it recognizes the heading, it recognizes that SR is strontium, and then it puts the format itself? I mean, there's got to be a way to do that, and that would make it so much easier for everyone to upload onto the database, and would make it so that people aren't having to spend a lot of time.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to just show how data can be loaded. Is that? Yeah,
well, I mean, what the current ability to send data is through spreadsheets, basically. And we have internally that software to get it into our database by reading these spreadsheets.
So it's okay that your format is not the same as everyone else's?
It's totally okay. It's totally okay. There's, we basically provide these templates in order to show what are the metadata that you should really provide for us. Anything else doesn't matter. And you might know when you take your own data into GeoMap app, it's actually intelligent enough to find the columns where you have latitude, longitude in, and it can even be misspelled, and it will find that. So those are solutions that can be made.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
Anyone else got anything to say about the use of data or the non-use of databases, or anything that would encourage you to? That isn't actually using them as in, but using them not to put data in, but to actually use them to get data out and find things out. You just having a stretch, or?
No, I don't know if this came up because I missed the start of the conversation, but I was completely blown away by what you talked about today. And I know that we publish all of our individual glass analyses and supplementary with our articles. I'm going to go back next week, and I'm going to take all these files I've already prepared for entry for the journals that have been submitted and they're published. I'm going to submit it. So, and then anything else that's published that I've got, because it's there, there's a database there, I can submit it there, so I'm just going to go do it. So, and it's published, so there's no big deal.
Right,
I mean, it's excited.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to? Okay.
So what I can show is clearly very biased towards geochemistry. So is that okay with everybody? I mean, there is the GeoCron database as well, but. So please excuse me because I'm not a PC user and feel quite challenged. No. Oh, I have a W too much. And now it's all gone. Okay. Now, okay. So these are basically all the data types that we currently accept, and there's, as you see here, the sensor-based data that's focused on contributions to the marine geoscience data system and primarily data acquired on ships. Not all of it. So here is basically a list of any types of data that you have, and I think it will just nothing is happening. Okay, and let's go here, and there's the button for the data templates. So we had many years ago, sort of 2005, 2006. We ran a couple of workshops to define how you can basically guide metadata for geochemical data sets. And that ended up in classifying or categorizing methods by bulk elemental analysis, bulk isotopic analysis, and then the same for in situ, because these 4 different categories have different types of metadata along with it. And for each one you can find an example here, and I mean the empty template for you to fill in, or an example that is already filled in. And now this is awkward because it's pretty big, but that's okay. So
does it zoom down in the bottom right?
Oh, good. Good. But then you might not be able to read it anymore. I don't know if that's a problem right now. So showing just down here, you have a set of tabs. So on the first one is all the information about either the data set or the publication that has the data. That is basically the link that we just talked about, that every data point in this data set will basically point back to that reference. And then you have a spreadsheet that has all the information about samples. So here, as I said, you have the sample name of that the investigator uses for a particular sample, and that should always stay with it. And then you have IGSNs, these numbers. So obviously we encouraged this person to register the samples, and they started just at 0001 here. It's funny. But then you have and basically when you submit data to EarthChem, you don't necessarily have to fill in latitude, longitude if you have registered the samples and provided that information already. We don't want to duplicate work. So if all the information about a sample is provided to the sample registry, we can pull that out through web services by IGSN. So it doesn't need to be filled in again. So yeah, there's location information. How do you scroll here? Oh, there it is. Okay. Description of location is, in this case here, is not provided. Now I'm on a different screen. Whoops. Okay. Lithology, age description. For cores, depth in core is important, and then there are, any number of columns that you can add to it as much as you want. And these are actually pieces of information that the sample registry would also contain. And then you have the table with the actual data. Again, sample name, identification. We want to track what material of a sample is actually analyzed. So we distinguish between whole rock data and glass data clearly, especially in all the volcanic world, but right now we're doing it for lunar basalts, distinguishing the glass analyses from whole rocks and so on. And if it's a mineral, you would basically let us know here what type of mineral it is.
Do you have pull-down menus or?
At the moment, not. No. There is a tab on the file has a README, an instruction file, what needs to be. But that's something we really need to do. But we are actually in the process of bringing all this online, so you don't fill it into a spreadsheet, but rather, most of the metadata, fill that in online, and then just upload spreadsheets that belong to the metadata. So, but that's about a year from now that it will be released.
But there are significant advantages to being able to upload many samples at a time via.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no. I mean this system where you upload things will be for batch uploading. That's the same when you register samples. You don't do that one by one. You can generate your template. If there's interest, I can show you that. You can generate your own template, and then you upload it online, and you can register many thousand samples in one batch. So, okay. And this is, that's as we talked about this sample preparation that may be relevant, chemical treatments, and so on. And then you just enter whichever parameters. You don't need, you don't need to have elements in a specific order or whatever. You just let us know what the variable is. And the variables in the meantime can be others than chemical. So, any other physical properties of a sample can be added as well. Or mineralogical composition, like rock mode and so on, is used. So as you see, it goes on and on. And then you have a tab here for what we call primary analytical metadata, what are really the strongly recommended ones, if not mandatory. So you want to have a technique for a particular parameter. You have the technique, you have the laboratory, and then other metadata like analyst or analysis date are optional to fill in. And then you have the pieces on reference materials that were measured, and as you see, that's unfortunately still very rare provided. It's nicely provided usually with isotope ratio measurements, but for especially XRF analyses, it's very rare that we get that data. And again, it will be then up to the user to say, I trust the data anyway or not. And then we do capture, if somebody actually is willing to provide that, further method-specific metadata as detection limits, blanks, normalizations, or for the isotope data, it's fractionation correction and other stuff. And here are the vocabularies actually. The last tab here has all the vocabularies in. But we correct that when we load it up. I mean, so it's a lot of user support that we're trying to do. Okay, so now I want to go back here. So you see, I mean, I don't need to go through all the templates. I think you know what is there. And when you want to give us the submit your data set, you go through this process. What is required is to have an account with us. That gives you an authentication. You use your email and enter a password. And it's always, if you had NSF money, it's good to provide the number of the award, because it automatically then allows you to generate a compliance report. We have a tool for that. You type in your award number, and it will give you sort of a summary of the data sets that are in the database, so you can show to NSF this is all provided. So I'm just going to say no, because I don't want to deal with that right now. So I will have to log in here. Here comes the challenge to know if I know my password. Okay, so it clearly knows the name of the person, and so I, can type anything in. Language, is it a collection? So we have different types of data, and something that gets increasingly submitted are actually sort of databases, syntheses that people have created of, certain regions and so on, so they can be published through this as well. But you can also send software in. We will send it off to repositories that actually deal with that. And then you enter, authors first and add. You can add as many authors as needed. I don't know. Maybe I should rather use myself if I have ever been an author, but I haven't. So I leave it with Erica. Okay. So you have more co-authors. You can add an abstract to it. You will categorize, whatever is in that data set. It can be multiple things. You can add keywords, and then the related publication. If you just copy in your EndNote record or something like that, or if you type in the DOI, it will automatically fill this. And we ask if you want to get a DOI for the data set, then spatial coverage. This will be improved in the next release, actually, in capturing more precise geospatial information. Let's say it's actually regional and something like that, that you would put in. And then you upload your file. And you set, this is, as I mentioned, the release date for any, whoops. Oops, didn't put that, I didn't. Is there something? No, doesn't want to take it, I don't know. Yeah, you should, right? Or maybe I have to, oh, okay, I need it here. And then you click your submit and you're all done. You will get a message that we have received it, that it's in the process of being reviewed, and it usually takes the data managers a few hours to go through it, send back comments, say, would you be willing to register your samples so they have DOIs, or there is this piece of information missing, and so on. And then we approve and request the DOI, and then it's out there whenever the release date. The metadata will be accessible to anybody already, but the data set itself will not be downloadable until that release date is reached. And we send out about 4 weeks before the release date, we send out a reminder to the author saying, are you aware this data set is coming up for release? Do you want to keep it still, or is it okay to make it public? So that's the process.
What is the mode for editing? So if you have a sample and you entered in the basic information about it, and then you get geochemistry data on it, you can just log in and add?
That would be a new data set then. And I'm talking.
No, it's fine.
So in the library, every data set is by itself. It's sort of identified, this is the 200 values that you send to us at this point with a certain description. And we take that into these synthesis databases. And if a year later, you have trace element chemistry, it would be a new data set here with trace element chemistry, but when we load that into the synthesis database, it will be automatically linked to that sample and will increase the data set available for that sample. So that's really the difference between these catalogs or libraries of data sets and the syntheses, which have the bigger, power to actually for you to work with it for your science. This is really a library where you can find stuff, where we can make sure it's identified, it's linked properly to your award. I mean, there's very often a sample that is collected in the field is analyzed by 3 different groups that have 3 different awards with NSF. And we need to track which award funded which piece of data for that sample, because each one of the investigators wants their credit. But for the science layer, all this data needs to come together. And that's happening through that process of ingesting it into the EarthChem database.
So, is there any movement to have this as a requirement for publication?
That is what I mentioned earlier this morning, is this editors roundtable, that at this point I don't think it will be a real requirement. It will be a best practice, and it will depend for a while, I think, on the editor, how rigorous the editor enforces the policy that the journal sets. And this meeting that's coming up in October at AGU, but is a meeting of all the major journals. I mean, we have Elsevier there, Springer, Science, Nature, whatever I'm missing right now, but that is trying to actually have a common policy across all the journals to say, when you submit chemical data, this is all the information you need to provide. You can have a plot and not give us the actual underlying data points. And the best practice is to actually send it to an open access repository, and there will be suggestions which these repositories are. They need to comply with certain standards. So, a database that does not have arrangements for long-term archiving or for, DOI for citability of the data will have a harder time to be listed in that. And that's, so, I mean, the requirement, the mandate will, it's going to be more on the side of the funders, where the requirement is to submit the data to a public archive. Because journals, I mean, they're becoming more and more open access, but there are still journals that, you can only access when you have a subscription, and that would basically limit the access to the data, and the data are supposed to be public.
I think NERC require you to submit data to data repository, don't they?
Some sort of,
yeah. And there is an ERC data repository which you can do things as well, because everyone here isn't getting American funding, so that is something that's a requirement in Britain as well.
And there are clearly, for what's been the struggle for the journals is that there are good repositories for certain data types, but there are none for others. So they can't prescribe that all the data goes to certain places if there isn't really a good repository. So what has happened is that people submit or send their data into these very generic places like Figshare, or there are a couple of other very generic repositories. In some cases, also universities are offering now these repositories. I mean, Columbia has an academic commons where you can put it and then we give it a DOI and so on, follow all the good practices. But those data sets that sit in those repositories are hard to discover for a community. So if you're looking for geochemical data, it's natural to go to EarthChem, or if you're looking for Tephra data, to go to the Tephra database, but you wouldn't necessarily search every university's repository, right? That's why I think from a point of the researcher, it really should be pushed forward as a community to send data to these disciplinary repositories where there is some expertise to know how, what the metadata should be and do some data quality control. And second, it will make the discovery of the data so much easier for everybody.
Can I comment? Sorry for being too long. As you can say, you just said that push community, put data, and what about making incentive for people to submit data? We discussed it a little bit during this breakdown session. Because the reality is, as a scientist, you already have enough commitments. So one thing you want to do, put data, plot them, make a publication quality document, right? And system automatically can harvest this data, and it's up to you to allow big databases like you putting together, harvest this data if needed. So there is a way to build this kind of tools, system available. For example, Google, right? You just type in like one keyword and you suddenly get the right hit, and you don't have to search through like 20,000 records. So maybe it should be like, obviously I understand the value of one location where everything is sitting, but maybe we should be thinking also about incentive. Like, for example, you're developing some tools together, you're making our life easier actually, not more complicated. Because I can imagine like going through like 75 templates to submit one sample if I have just sodium, for example, measured or something. Well, thank you. What do you think generally about this approach, like incentive?
Well, I'm very much in favor of that, and you know, the great example that Anthony showed this morning of having you know, visualization capabilities, you know, direct links from the database into models and so on. I think those are the incentives that you can provide. But clearly, you know, what is an incentive to one person isn't necessarily very attractive to the other. I think what we as a repository can try to do is make the process of data contribution as painless as possible, and make sure that there is, you know, that people do get the credit for it, that we ensure, you know, the data is properly cited and so on. But unfortunately, and you know, anybody who runs a repository will probably know that we get the pressure on how much money we spend, and so there's usually not enough to build all the fancy tools that we would like to add to it. That's reality on our side as well. And it would be nice, I mean, that's why we're trying to actually provide much more interfaces to the data that can be used programmatically, so that you can build, you know, the tools that you need. So if we have services up there, if we have APIs that allow you to connect to the data, I think that will in the future allow people to just, you know, build applications that are actually useful for the whole community potentially, but that allow you to do with the data what you want to do.
Yeah, that would be a good idea, because this way you can build your original database, and yes, people will submit to one centralized location, but you still have control what you're displaying in your view. So that's a great idea, yeah.
There's a lot of information available in these supplementary files that we all submit to the publisher. Again, to lessen the workload on the authors of those files, would it not be possible for the publishers to send those supplementary files directly to you and incorporate in your database system?
The publishers don't really want to get into that because of the diversity of data types. I think that's where, again, this editors roundtable, where they're hoping to get some information. But yeah, I mean, there's actually in the biological world is a data system that has very much integrated with journals of societies, particularly in the biodiversity community. It's called Dryad, and they have integrated the submission of data for a paper with the submission to the archives. So it's one process, it's one interface that you use to submit your abstract, submit the data, and the system, sends the paper to the publisher and sends the data into the repository, and it's very well linked and integrated. That's sort of our goal that we hope, we can provide. Maybe, again, through this Council of Data Facilities, we can, agree on a common interface that allows to do that in some way. But it's a dream out there. The other way, we've had discussions in the at the last Goldschmidt conference with a group of people. Another step that can make data submission a lot easier is actually to start a catalog of labs and methods. So if you have basically a registry for your machine and you describe the procedure that you use for a particular element or set of elements, major elements, isotope ratios, and so on, you would just have to link your data set to that particular lab and to the method, and off it goes, and you don't have to enter that same information over and over again. So that's another thing we've discussed, where actually the experimental petrologist already jumped on board and said, oh yeah, we want to do that as well, because it really makes life easier. It would also provide sort of a catalog of analytical capabilities that you can put out there and say, yeah, this lab is open for outside users and so on, so it would be a nice idea as well. Yeah.
Kristen, when is the editors roundtable that you're speaking of? Is it something that happens every year, or is it being held at this year's AGU?
So the editors roundtable has a slightly longer history. I started that in 2007 just for geochemistry. And we actually generated a policy statement that, and you can go to the EarthChem webpage under About, it says Editors Roundtable, and you can see this policy statement that describes the recommendations how to report geochemical data in the literature. So now I revived it at the Goldschmidt in Florence. When was that? A year ago, I think, and there was interest from the publishers to broaden this across the entire earth sciences. So I've been running these editors roundtables at AGU and Goldschmidt so far, but now they will have regular meetings at GSA, AGU, EGU, and whichever other society might take it up to run these meetings. The meeting in October is sort of the kickoff. That is a larger meeting, workshop, where we're expecting about 70 people, representatives from data facilities, from publishers and editors, also some, the Office of Science and Technology Policy and, AAAS and so on are interested to participate. And that's really to discuss, how do we move with this? How what is the process? How do we ensure that this is an effort that can continue and so on? Because we just have some level of seed funding from NSF to get it off the ground.
Okay, so kind of as a follow-on from what we came to in consensus this afternoon from the workshop in terms of standardizing techniques and data collection and all of this. It sounds like one of our goals is to meet with this group, and I'm not sure if in October, if you'll be there or who will be there, if there needs to be someone or some statement maybe from this group showing our interest that we really want to make sure that we get this out there to this group, to these editors, to help instill these new recommendations that we're likely to come up with. Now, our timeline is going to probably be a year. It won't be quick, but do we need to get our foot in the door early? No. Okay.
No, I mean, what the intention is that we are actually, that's part of the NSF funding, is for setting up a website for this. I'm sure it will be named something else and not stay the Editors Roundtable. But this website is supposed to provide an overview of capabilities out there, of standards, what are the data facilities, which data types do they take, what procedures do they have, what community standards for data do exist, and so on. So once there is a community agreed Tephra standard or some, statement that you have, that will be incorporated into that website and is a resource then for an editor to look up and say, oh, this is Tephra data. Okay, let's make sure.
Yeah, it sounds like that's what we want.
The practices are followed. So there is no time frame for that. What this meeting really is about is the structure of the effort, much more than the individual practices that are out there.
Okay, that's excellent. Great.
So, is there any other comments on what we've just been talking about? Okay, shall we see what the next is on the list of?
Yeah, probably better to get this all closed down.
So did we have open before? Was it PowerPoint? I think we've already been discussing
a lot of it, yeah.
A lot of this actually. So where do you think we should go next? List of. We've actually managed to go right through this. Obviously, we came up with some good titles because we have actually been discussing these things. So again, I was wondering whether we should just move on to next steps and actions. Actually,
I think. Yeah. We spend so much time talking about this really at the end of today in the breakouts that in some ways, yeah, if we can sort of get on to the next steps and actions, then we know where we're going.
So, I think some of the next steps are things like this meeting, which is coming up. And I guess one of the things is going to come out of the document that comes out of this meeting, isn't it? Which is going to summarise a whole load of things, of which this is going to just be one part of it.
I think another action item that I sort of heard this morning was to find a place to communicate more, right? And having either I don't know what it's called, working group or something on the VHub side, or I could do something on the EarthCube website, which, the EarthCube has this workspace called Commons, where you can set up a group, an interest group, and then the advantage there is that you're actually exposing your discussion to the broader geoinformatics community. But, on the other hand, you could, via VHub, you could expose it more to the volcanologists. That's really up to you. Those are some venues to actually start putting up documents that others can download, possibly extending. I'm not sure if VHub has the capability of having a real discussion forum or not. I'm not sure.
Yes, it does.
It does. So that makes it easier actually to discuss maybe a first draft document that comes out here and so on. And once that document is there, I would recommend to have a get-together at one of the conferences that are attract most of this community and discuss further.
I was thinking actually just the question about where we're going to put all of the PowerPoint presentations and things. Are they going to be on some like VHub or something? It's going to be a.
Well, they'll be. We were thinking of putting them on VHub in the space that we already have for the meeting on VHub.
Yeah. So that would be that already exists or already exists.
Yeah. This is thank you, Jason. Yeah, we were also going to report back to the sponsors of the meeting with some kind of report about what we formulated here.
Yeah.
But the main archive would be on VHub then.
They call that anyway.
But I mean, maybe we should actually, as sort of the database people, also agree how we can start accepting data files. Just heard somebody said, I want to send my supplementary data. If everybody sends in some data sets that we can already ingest into the databases, maybe we can show the power of actually doing this, and more people will jump on board. So I happily invite everybody to send in Tephra data, and we can ingest it and make sure whichever data sets are relevant to Tephra base go there, and we coordinate among that. But if you have data that would be useful to start off with, and sometimes I recommend focusing in on a specific theme or on a specific region to establish a data set. We actually, I heard somebody say East Africa. We're starting to compile a data set for volcanic rocks in East Africa together with the volcanic gas emissions as a complete data set. So maybe that's a focus. It's driven in part by geoprisms focusing in on East Africa. So the AIDA operates the Geoprisms Data Management Office. So we always try to prepare data collections that support the focus sites. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's anything that the archaeologists or non-volcanologists, I guess, would like to get out of Tephra base or some similar database, because I feel like a lot of us had said chemistry and a couple of things about physical volcanology, but what would help you from a database like this?
Well, I can give some ideas. I would definitely want to know the sequence of Tephra layers in any particular geographic area. And I think that a lot of you would also, basically I would want to know what most Tephra chronologists would want to know. And additionally, there was something that came to my mind a while back, and that is that when geologists are cleaning up profiles, they find, a natural erosion and they're cleaning it up, or they're just digging a pit. Sometimes they do come across evidence of human activity. Maybe it's bits of charcoal, maybe it's stone tools. And they're like, oh, hey, archaeological site. I can't use this because people have messed up the stratigraphy. But actually, archaeologists would love that information, and it doesn't always get reported. So if that makes its way into your field notes, I would love it if that made its way into the archaeological community.
I think that's one thing in Iceland that we Richard and I work with archaeologists all the time, and they're involved in our research, and the sediment accumulation rates are all designed to look at human impacts on the environment and things as well. So that's an example of working with archaeologists, trying to understand how people have impacted on the environment. So that's one way that in Iceland we're actually using most of the work we do in Iceland isn't actually to do with volcanology. It's actually using as time markers to actually understand landscape change and also to link with archaeology as well.
So it seems like we have a nice framework that you've presented for EarthChem and these nice data, these nice spreadsheets to download. I guess the question is, do we need to now develop one for Tephra specifically, whether it's like physical volcanology of it, to put it on that website? I think this is a great resource. And then just start using that to report our data when we publish. I'm getting ready to publish a whole lot of data, and I'm sitting here thinking okay, so what would be the best way for me to publish it so that I can report it into this website, and downloading this spreadsheet and using it as a guide for me to fill out when I put it on the online supplementary material. That's kind of now what I'm thinking of doing, rather than using my own kind of way I think about reporting geochemistry. So it seems like really working towards that and in adding more templates on here, and then just being adamant about and trying to get those publishers to make us do that, because that's when we really are involved in this data, is when we have to publish it. And if they say, no, we're not publishing this paper until you put it in this format, we do it.
like we change the size of our fonts to 5.9 just because they make
Right.
it so or 6. So like that's the time that really we're going to do it. Once it's published, we're not going to go back and add it. So like I feel like that's really what we need to be working towards.
Is it possible to actually form a few small groups? You're obviously not going to do this with the whole workshop here or large groups. And leaving it up to one person is maybe also not the best way forward. But if there are few volunteers who would spend, a half hour together or an hour maybe to, modify what templates are already out there and say, this is how we usually report the data, that might be a way forward. Yeah. Some of those data types that you recorded probably.
I mean, I think that's a definite result of what we came up with already today. I mean, I think that if there's any action item or any result of this meeting, it will be exactly these templates, if you will, whether they're formatted into fact sheets or data sheets or a paper or whatever. We can do it however we want. We're still going to come up with these lists based on discipline, volcanology, archaeology, tephrochronology, and maybe then, once we have those, then we can work with you or whomever to develop these additional modules, templates, or whatever.
I just wanted to show you one thing that's just an approach that we've taken for the sample registry, because samples are different, and so we didn't want to generate 50 different spreadsheets and so on. So we've developed a tool where you can generate your own spreadsheet. There's basically a whole selection of metadata, and when you select a specific sample type, it just pre-selects. So let me just. It's going to be just a couple of minutes, but keep discussing until I pull it up here.
Has anyone got anything else they want to add? Yeah.
Just because this has come up often, does the geochem or earthchem, does it have, I know it has the raw data, but did it have fields for standard deviations or any sort of error measurement? It does? Okay.
Yeah, so this idea of a smaller group, I mean, I don't think we really need to do that because already we've had sort of a group consensus. The conveners will take the action item of writing all this up in a skeletal format, presenting it back to this working group or this workshop group to look over, edit, comment on, and then we're going to open it up for a wider group to look at. And at that point, so it doesn't, I mean, I don't think we have to convene yet a smaller group. We're already kind of checking that off the list, and then we'll move on from here. And then we can, come to you and see if this is what we still want to do and if it seems reasonable. I mean, if it's something that you guys can modify templates or modify your database to fit it, then yeah, I mean, it seems like the next big action would be, let's just use Britta as an example. We'll guarantee some number of scientists in this group will try to put in some number of samples and then just go from there, and maybe we just set goals. And if everyone starts doing it, then it'll just become the trend. That's a great idea. I mean, Britta, if you do that, that really will help because you've got a lot of data. I mean, people will follow. But it needs to fit into a format that's easy. I mean, that's part of the problem. But so within the next year, I mean, it's great that you want to go back home and do it, but if you feel like it's cumbersome in doing so, maybe let us know. And so it may be that in the next year you can do this, because by then maybe it will be made a lot easier for you to upload your data because it's going to be more Tephra specific, or at least a module will be more Tephra specific.
Yeah, so you can just, I pulled this up, so this is basically a list of all the metadata that exist in the sample registry, and I've pulled up, I basically selected up here a sample type and selected dredge. So, it has, for example, deselected classification and sample description because a dredge can have multiple types of samples and so on. It has pre-selected already that you have a beginning latitude and an end latitude for a dredge in the oceans and so on. So, but if you know you don't have some of these, you can always just deselect it, and then you basically submit to create template, and what you get back is a spreadsheet that you can then fill in. And then you upload it actually exactly to this website again, and there will be there's a built-in data quality check that will tell you this field was not filled out correctly, that expects a number for your latitude and not some text and so on. So it helps you to upload the whole thing. And the data managers then look at it as well. So that's, for example, a way that we don't need to have 20 different templates, but you just have a whole list of metadata that are relevant or data types, and depending on, you select, I want to submit this, and it basically pre-selects that. That's an option.
So you could easily have a drop-down menu. You just add Tephra to that drop-down menu.
Right. Right, and you create a new combination of information, right? So you can see here, that's the drop-down list, of different sample types that we have right now. So if you have, core half rounds and so on, it has depths in the core in the spreadsheet and so on. And that could, if you do something like this, you could add information about internal structure or whatever pieces of information you want. This is extendable because actually the database is structured in a way that the type of metadata is a variable. So you can add any type of metadata and still work with it. Just, you never have to think about the technical solutions. Just tell us what you want.
I think another next step, something from earlier this morning, a lot of people were talking about creating these standard operating procedure sheets, whether it be for sampling or for statistics or something like that. And we all talked about creating this skeleton of these standard operating procedures. So I think the next step is, I think we should figure out someone or a group of people to really get that started, because I can see this being something that's like, oh, that sounds nice, but never happens.
Yeah, so that's what I meant. So just by turning all those in and presenting those today, that the charge goes to the convener. So we'll start that.
Excellent.
Yeah, we'll start that, and we'll solicit that back to you, and then we'll solicit that to a larger group, because of course not everyone who needs to be here is here. And then, but we'll set some deadlines.
Great.
Yeah, we absolutely, within the next year. I mean, I don't exactly know what the goal is, but I'm envisioning within the next year, or by, something like that, we'll convene some sort of all-hands meeting or something at AGU and just be done with it.
Yeah.
Give everyone the opportunity and enough time to go with it, be done with it, meet with this editors group, and just make it happen.
Right. You gotta keep momentum.
You gotta keep it going, absolutely. I mean, I think that you have to have goals like that in a workshop. Otherwise, it's great, we're all chatting, but if you don't have a product, I mean, not just a piece of paper with a bunch of lists, but I mean, so that's why we had that breakout today. And we will absolutely take it to the next step. And that means when we ask you guys to comment on it, you have to comment. And if you don't, then you'll lose your opportunity. That's just the way it works. So we will set some deadlines and we'll move it forward as quickly as we can.
I mean, is it even is it reasonable to think to get together at the upcoming AGU? I mean, it is 4 months from now, which is some time, but
well,
as you just said, keep the momentum. It's
well, I think
if we wait a year and a half, it might be a little long.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just that we've a little late for that in terms of organizing things.
I can help with that because I basically have to rent rooms every day for different meetings.
Well, there's certainly a possibility.
I could help with that.
Yeah.
If there is interest to get together, we make it happen.
I think
we'll talk about it.
We were thinking more formally, but I think you're thinking informally getting together. Of course, that's
not a formal town hall, but I mean you can still invite whoever wants to come. Right?
Well, and then just over lunch, Marcus had the idea of actually submitting an abstract by today
I already submitted it.
They said there were internal emails that it's probably going to be open until Friday 2 p.m. So.
Yay. Yeah. Anyway,
I'm on the program committee. That's
anyway, I think Marcus will probably submit an abstract on behalf of the working group just to sort of let people know what we did, have a poster or a talk. So there'll be something there, but we can
you
get that going in terms of an informal meeting.
Is it too late to do a town hall type thing?
You can still submit a town hall request. That's the same system as the abstracts.
Oh, so by today?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you just have to write I think it's 300 words or something. It's shorter than the normal abstracts, the proposals for town halls. But you have to be aware that you will be assigned a time. You have not much flexibility to select what you want. That's usually an issue. It can overlap with whatever other activities. But you get it for a much cheaper price than renting a room at a hotel or restaurant. They have there is another system on the fall meeting page for requesting events. So they do cost more money, but they are a different way of holding a meeting that is not included in the formal town hall schedule then.
Okay, well, I guess it's something for us to think about. You can do that via email or listserv or something.
Well, an EGU might be a good venue too, just because it gives us a little bit more time and pulls in people from a different region.
And EGU is way easier with the town halls, or they have these splinter meetings, which you can request basically until a few weeks before the meeting happens. They don't cost you anything. You just get a room from them. Again, they just fill up, first come, first served, the rooms they have available, and the meetings can be any time during the day. It's much more flexible than the AGU meetings. So that's actually a really good idea, because there's a lot of activity in Europe as well, and balancing that a little bit between having a meeting here in the US right now and then getting some more people from, actually it's not only Europe, but sort of Asia as well coming.
When is the next EGU and where?
It's always April. I think this year it's more earlier April. Last year it was very late in April, but it's around the 10th, 8th, 10th of April. Can you look that up? And it's always in Vienna.
Okay, so we're
beautiful Vienna. Every year looking forward to it.
It's almost 5 o'clock, and I guess if there's any sort of last comments or last actions or ideas that people have, now would be a good time. Otherwise, we'll finish up.
So when's Tephra 2015? Yeah, I mean, are you interested in an annual Tephra workshop?
That would probably
Marcus
depend
is
on
shaking his head
funding.
no.
Oh yeah, inside is
Biannual.
Yeah.
Yeah, when is Inqua?
It's in July.
Yeah, I think an annual
Yeah,
meeting would
and
kill
it's,
people, but as most of us older folks know. But you got all the energy in the world, I think, Brad, so go for it.
That sounds like that kind of responsibility.
I guess we're sort of done-ish, and the only other thing that we need, well, two other things. One is thanks for attending and participating and actually being great colleagues and people to work with. I think there's a lot of neat exchange of ideas here, and it's a real community that works together really nicely, I think.